We left off Wednesday with an idea that I hope will haunt you for the rest of your life.
Yep.
That there is absolutely no global food shortage. We just don't make it a priority to target hungry people with all that food. And invariably, this can become a political conversation, and a lot of you don't believe this, but I am actually very politically open-minded, and I love political discourse. I just don't want to politicize this. I just want to stick to the facts. Because I'm pretty sure that whatever your politics are, if you're okay with children starving, you're an a-hole. Politics aside, we all want to solve that problem. Nobody's okay with children starving. So, here's the 4 obstacles to food distribution. There are 4 reasons that food doesn't reach hungry. And you know, I'm not going to bad guy anyone. This isn't like capitalism is bad or free markets are bad or you're bad. Like, we're all a part of this. So anyway, here's the 4 problems. Food distribution obstacles, study goal number 3. First problem is we've delocalized food. People have always gone hungry. You should know that. Like, we've never had a time in history where people didn't go hungry. That's not the point. People have been going hungry as long as there's been people. But food systems until pretty recently were local. Which means Adam is a pig rancher in some remote island somewhere. And whatever the size of their economy, he either sells or trades with somebody who fixes tractors and somebody who teaches Adam's children and the doctor who stitches him when the tractor breaks, and the dude who grows the carrots for the house and the pig. Historically, those localized food systems ran pretty close to carrying capacity. Because as people get hungrier, you kind of can't keep feeding people forever. So if his little island can only feed 200 people, there's always going to be a few that are hungry. But you know, you kind of limit population growth in that little isolated space because there's only so much food for those people, and then they'll go, oh, well, maybe it's bad luck, maybe it's good luck, but you know, population's kind of leveled off. And locally, if you live in some really nice grassland that produces a lot of farm output, then you can probably have a big population where there's a lot of food, and where you've got a little bit of food, you get a little population. Localized food systems. Local economy. We don't need to get all ideological about this. That's not a beautiful system, but industrialization, fossil fuels, cheap travel, growth in some economies. Fast forward to the present, I can fly over to Adam Coffin and say, bro, how much are you getting for your pig? And he's like, well, around here, you know, people don't make a lot of money, so my pig is worth about $5. And I'm like, all right, Adam, I come from los Estados Unidos. Bang, how about $100 for your pig? And he's like, what? Hell yeah. And I'm like, cha-ching, because when I get that thing back to the United States, I can sell it for $400. American consumers get cheaper pork products. Food importers get plenty of profit. Farmers have a growth in wealth. Do you realize that we get to sell this transaction as beneficial? Because we are helping distant farmers earn more money. We call that economic development. And we are lowering the price of American food supply. We call that a social program here too. This is a win-win, right? But you all identify the losers in this example? Who are the losers in this example?
The locals
Foreign
are
consumers.
301.
The locals. But come on. They could buy the pig. Except here's a really sad fact. I can't remember which way I'm supposed to round, so I'm going to shoot from the hip. 1/2 of humans on Earth today live on $2.51 or less per day. The median daily human income is $2.51 today. Imagine I'm off by a factor of 100% and it's actually 502, okay? Let's just be like really safe about this. Do y'all realize that I'm like barely middle class around here and my daily budget, even after I split it with my wife and kids, is like $300 a day? You understand that, right? Like some of your moms and dads, their daily budget is probably hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. We're competing with Miss Tractor Fixer and Miss, what were you doing? School teacher and Miss Doctor and Mr. Carrot Farmer in some poor country for their local pork. And this guy's not an idiot. He's trying to get out of poverty too. He wants a car and a TV and a cell phone. You don't even notice how good your diet is. Like, have you all thought about where our food even comes from? The average American plate travels 1,275 miles. That's the average calorie in your diet. We go to all the world's societies and we pick all their plums. And that's what we eat. My dog probably eats $2 a day. Do you all know that, like, vanilla is a bean that comes from a seed pod of an arboreal orchid? We just, like, make doggy ice cream with that. At Rory's, doggy ice cream. So nice. Hey, dog, eat my orchid seeds. My boy eats so much sushi that when my parents had to take him out to dinner, they didn't know that he puts back like $50 of nigiri. They're like, what do you want, children? And he was like, I'll take 6 of the bluefin, 4 of the yellowtail, and 4 of the salmon, please. And my mom's like, ah. And my boy's like, arf, 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 arf. And he's eating like a king. He doesn't even know that that's expensive. My coffee comes from Sumatra. Raise your hand if you could put Sumatra on a map. It's okay, me neither. It's not your fault. I don't know where it is. I don't have to, because I'm rich. It doesn't even cost me that much. I eat like a king. I eat fancy, really specialized diet. I eat like the best of fish, the best of foreign cuisines. I also scavenge. Okay, fine, I eat trash off the floor, but I mean, honestly, like if you look at my fridge, I've got like microbrew mustard and like really fancy, like far away cheeses too. And I have, I eat sushi like once or twice a week because I'm like connected to all the local fishermen, and it's like how I trade for all my fishing lead. Like my homie Ben just texted me like, yo, I need another 120 pounds worth of fishing sinkers. And I just thought like, huh, who am I gonna invite to sushi next week? Because I trade him for seafood. I'm just drowning in food. Do you realize that that's how you can tell you're in a rich country, is how little percentage of your income is dedicated to your diet? We spend, among all Jaws people, one of the lowest percentages of our income on our diet, and we still eat like kings. There are some Americans who spend less than 2% of their income on food. Most of us are somewhere between 5 and 10%, depending on how poor you are. Globally, most people spend 50 to 75% of their income on food. Can you imagine if I had to do that? But I can take 5, 6, 7% of my food and be like, I'll take all their food. And I'll take all their food and feed that to my dog. I'll take all their food and whatever, let it rot on the shelf, because I can, because I'm rich. I eat chocolate from the tropics. I eat fruit from the South Pacific. I eat fish from the most luxurious, productive fisheries on Earth. I eat wild game. I'm going to go fish on a boat this weekend. I'm taking venison burgers that I made. Whatever I want. And it doesn't cost me anything relative to the rest of the world population. Because problem number one, we have a globalized or a delocalized food system, which puts us in competition with the world's poor for the same pig or the same carrot or the same farmer's output. No farmer can grow food for their nation. It just doesn't make sense because their nation is a bunch of starving poor losers and we're rich and willing to pay for that food. You know, if we had a grown-up in the room, we could avoid this. We could structure that price thing. You understand that, right? Like if I want to sell a pig for 400, I could give the farmer $6, so he's still growing, and then the other 350 or whatever could go into programs to help feed those other folks in that room. That's doable. We could do that. But there's never a grown-up in the room. Because you're trying to say, hey, you make less money or I make less money, and nobody wants to be the guy making less money. So when you can capitalize food systems, you can globalize them, and when you can globalize them, the poor lose. Beautiful recipe, right? Problem number two. Some of you will guess the answer because of the lecture order. Would anybody like to guess what is the deadliest weapon of war? Right. And I need to remind you that the people who starve in warfare are not the ones we're trying to fight. They're just the people whose food supply is disrupted by conflict. Number two is conflict. If Adam Coffin is a soldier in the wrong army, I'm going to kill him one way or another. That's what he gets for being a soldier. And really, we're all okay with that because that's war. We send our boys and girls off to die somewhere else too. It's war. But the funny thing is, there's a whole community that's trying to like ship rice to the supermarket, and we're going to use up their gasoline, we're going to mess up their roads, we're going to make minefields that nobody wants to drive across, we're going to interrupt the water supply so the rice doesn't get picked, and we're going to affect the cellular communication so the door doesn't open on time or whatever. And this is not usually counted when we measure the casualties of war. War is a lot deadlier if you consider disruptions in the food supply. It's just really tough to count those people. Because if homegirl is rich and there's war around her, she's going to get all the food anyway because she's rich. But if homegirl is poor, she was already in a marginal food supply, she's going to starve to death. But it's tough to tell if the war messed up all of her food supply, right? Because she's poor. She might have just starved anyway, right? So those numbers are always kind of fuzzy. But it's pretty safe to say, and you should know, that the deadliest thing about warfare is disrupting people's food and water supply. Conflict is number 2. Number 3 and 4 at this point just start to seem silly. Because number 3, we put a bunch of agricultural output into cars. Corn, sugarcane, soy are made into biofuels. Today we make most of our biofuels from food. This is good and it's bad. I'd like everybody to watch this because I'm going to use hand signals. Ready? Biofuels are good because, you know, we don't take ancient carbon from under the rocks and mess up the atmosphere. That's nice. It's current carbon. Today's carbon makes corn that goes back to the atmosphere. That was already in the atmosphere, so that's just short cycle carbon. That's current carbon. Biofuels are nice because short cycle carbon. But when you make your biofuels out of food, we call that food to fuel or ag fuel. That's bad because we don't have enough food to share with our cars. There's still people that need some of that food. If you can grow corn, sugarcane, or soy, you can feed people. But it just turns out that we got so much money we can afford to put that stuff into our cars and outcompete those world's poor. And that's a globalized resource too. Problem number 4. It is shockingly expensive to get the food to the people who actually need it. Transportation and food aid are really, really expensive. Except for the 4 of you who don't write things down, anybody have questions about the 4 reasons why distribution keeps people from getting all that extra food? Yeah?
Like, what should I write down for the 3rd one? Like just
biofuel? I don't know. I don't know what you should write.
No, yeah.
What do you need to write?
It was just a lot. I was just. Yeah.
What else? I guess I just want to. I want to say something again. We could avoid the globalization of food where we compete with the world's poor, but there's never a grown-up in the room. We could consider that warfare includes innocent bystanders. We sometimes count the innocent bystanders of the bombs, I guess. There's some people doing that. But we don't even consider the innocent bystanders of disrupting people's food supply. You know that 10 years after war, people still keep starving. It takes a long time to fill all that productively. Like, biofuels is a good idea. We just shot ourselves in the foot by not considering the downside. And you know what is too expensive? I just gotta wonder, when we start having a political argument about this, who wants to admit they're okay with people starving? Like, what's more important? That we be right politically, or that people don't starve? Like, I can't believe that we're living in this day and age. Okay. 4 is stuff out of the book. 5, I've got a few notes for you. They're mostly just words. One person, please define for me what is grazing. Any person. Yeah.
Like a field to be eaten by cattle?
That is not the verb. Like, grazing is a verb. So you're thinking rangeland, I think. That's a field to be eaten by cattle. Or pasture.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you
pasture is managed and rangeland is wild. But what is grazing? The action, the verb.
The act of cows eating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cows eating grass.
Yeah, animals eating plant, yeah. Anybody here golf? So if you golf and you look on the, first of all, what kind of a teenager are you? Who golfs?
Just for credit.
My mom's really
like,
good.
it's not-
What's wrong with you people?
I don't actually golf.
My God. Anyway, you just admitted the most embarrassing thing right there. I hit a ball and then I chase it, and then I hit it, and then I chase it. Like my dog does that. Okay.
It's the only sport I can like do.
Nice. I love your standards. This is great. You call that a sport, huh? Okay. I'm just talking shit. That's not it. I shouldn't. Okay. Did I just crush your dreams? You're like a pro golfer. Like crafting your salad right there. Okay. If anybody's ever been to like a golf course or you golf a lot, you know that the greens right around the hole, that like little pocket where it's super dense, small, thin grass, that gets mowed like 2, 3, 4 times a day. And the reason that gets mowed so much is because a little bit of grazing makes grass grow on more dirt. In other words, you need to know that a benefit of grazing is it increases productivity if it's just a little trim. You can actually get more productivity if you graze a little bit. Because the plants tend to grow outward and thus use more sunlight and more soil. So grazing can increase productivity.
Well, how though? Like,
Can't wait?
how does that work?
Evolution shapes grasses to kind of grow like this because in the wind, you know, they're not always exposed to the sunlight. But there's like a stress response where if the grass gets trimmed, it's like, oh, bad things are happening over here. So they tend to grow outward a little bit, and by growing outward, they tend to stretch the roots outward so they reach more soil nutrients. So biomass of grassland that is grazed a little bit is greater than biomass of grassland that's left to go wild. You can actually see this happen. Watch what happens on your golf greens if you stop mowing. They turn into like thin, wispy, tall grass, and if you were to weigh how much grass, it's more on the putting green. So grazing can be good, but of course, if you leave the grazers out there too long, they will eat the quote-unquote crown of the grass. It's like the quick of your nail. So it's the part that manages the growth. Do you all know that if you damage the quick of your nail, you don't grow a new fingernail? You all heard about this? The quick is that like little arc of white at the base of your nail. Like right
Wow.
there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jose. I appreciate that.
It's the only one that has a quick.
Ah.
Can
Great.
you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. But no, like that
Yeah.
the quick is like the base of the fingernail. If you like drop something on there or whatever, the nail will keep growing, but then you don't get a new one if you hurt that. And the same is true for grasses. You know, if you trim the top, they grow well. But if you get all the way down to the crown, which is like the nubby white part that the goats love to eat, if you get down to that like really starchy, kind of sugary part at the base of the grass, then it won't grow anymore. That's called overgrazing. When the livestock eats the critical parts of the grass and then the grass stops growing. So some animals will actually chase all the way down the roots and eat dirt too. Like goats, once they've eaten all the grass, they'll eat all the crowns. Once they've eaten all the crowns, they'll eat all the roots. They just eat the dirt.
Don't see everything.
Pretty much. There's a team of trained goats that eats invasive species in cities. How cool is that?
When I lived in San Francisco, they like every spring or whatever they bring out the goats, and they're just like in. It was weird.
Yeah, they're rad they eat poison oak and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. When I lived in the mountains, I always wanted to use goats instead of weed whacking, but I couldn't afford the fences. Now look, if you lose all the grasses, then first of all, you can get erosion from overgrazing. Second of all, if you don't have any contributions of organic material, then the quality of soil can go down. So both of these are possible. So, the thoughtful, sustainable thing to do with grazing is the last vocab term for number whatever we're on, rotational grazing. The idea of moving the cattle around, so they eat over here for a couple of days, then they eat over there for a couple of days, then they eat over there for a couple of days, and they eat over here for a couple of days. Like, you know, mowing different lawns instead of mowing the same one over and over. But I didn't want to talk about that one too much. Number 6 we've really got to talk about. There's a couple of details that are really critical. This is like big stuff. How many of you drew that diagram of soil horizons that I told you to draw? If you didn't, make a note that you should. But it looks like almost all of you did. I want to say something about the bottom, which is bedrock, the R horizon, and then the top, which is topsoil, the A horizon. Let's start at the bottom. Bedrock is basically solid rock. It's the solid part of the tectonic plate. It's the plate of the tectonic plate. So let's go all the way to plate tectonics. Please look up. Big old like pieces of drifting rock on top of the magma. Those chunks of rock, because they flex on top as they move over other stuff, they start to crack a little bit. And those cracks, you know, weathering and water and biological activity, they keep crumbling. And so you have bedrock, then broken up rocks, then like sand, and then like the organics on top. Okay. That rock, because it's solid, tends to stop water. Watch. If bedrock is tipped up on a mountain range, groundwater will pour downhill. But if bedrock is kicked up by something over here and something else over there, you get like a bowl of rock that'll fill up with groundwater. That's called an aquifer. So groundwater is contained on top of bedrock. This comes up in a few units months from now, but I wanted to get this in now. Also consider that fossil fuels would kind of sweat through to the surface if they weren't capped by rock. In places where the bedrock is cracked, petroleum or natural gas come to the surface, like the La Brea tar pits. But that's pretty unusual. Most fossil fuels are below bedrock. Hiccups are the best. If you think about it, you'll never win. Just give up. I was going to drink a bunch of water and just pee a lot and still have a hiccup until she forgets about it. Fun, embarrassing fact about me, I don't really, contrary to popular belief, I don't actually drink very much. But on the rare occasion that it gets away from me, I get the hiccups and my family makes fun of me. And my wife would be like, look, children, your dad's an a-hole. And I'll be like, ugh. And I like literally get like the goofy, like, wino hiccups. It's so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. I don't know how that works, but it's real. So that was bedrock. Now, if you look at the top, I need you to know some words. The A horizon is also known as topsoil. Topsoil is very, very thick in grasslands. We talked about this because, you know, it's like a huge compost pile where you keep adding on top. Please look up. The A horizon is tall in grassland, but in deserts, you don't have any in some cases. Like if you just have sand, that is no topsoil. If you just have sand, there's no topsoil. I gotta tell you a story, and then we're gonna come back to the topsoil. I showed off and told you that my beautiful artist friend was here making beautiful art with his beautiful wife and daughter, right? Some of you met River during the seminar, maybe. So that little girl, she's 4, and she's over at our house, and I was like, "What kind of toys do you want? My kids have toys." And she's like, "I want Legos. I'm getting into Legos." And I was like, "Oh, great. My boy's 8. He's kind of getting over Legos." Go in his room, ask him for some Legos. And my boy's like, "Check this out." And he's got like all these Legos that he built like on top of his like dresser. And he's got like tubs and tubs of, and she goes, "Oh, that's cool." And she saw something he built, like a castle or tank, I don't know what the hell it was. And he's like, "Oh, do you want to build that?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'll take it apart for you." And he goes over and he goes, bang, 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 bang. He like, takes it all apart. And he hands her all the pieces and goes, "There you go. Now you can go build it again." And she was really stoked. And then she went to play for like 3 hours. She was like playing with the Legos. That's the end of my story.
Okay.
But that's relevant because dirt. Okay. So, bye, everybody. I'm done. Goodbye. Yeah, have a good weekend. Okay. Basically, life is just building Legos in the sense that producers take useless little pieces and assemble them into useful biomass. Like nitrogen and carbon and oxygen and hydrogen make like sugars and proteins that we all need to live. So producers pick up all the little pieces and use solar energy to like make the bonds happen that build these structures that are critical to us, the macromolecules of our daily life, like sugars and proteins and carbs and all that stuff. And you wouldn't get any more life if there wasn't some decomposer taking the leftovers of you and breaking them down back into those building blocks like my son did for River. The secret to topsoil is the actively decomposing organic material. We call that humus. That's one M, not hummus with 2 M's. Decomposing organic material, that's a vocab term, humus. Some people say humic material or humic ingredients or humic content. It's definitely not hummus. Is humus or humic material. And this is like the whole magic of life. Like there's a whole ecosystem in the soil that takes all that litter, like dead leaves and wood chips and decomposing rat or whatever, and turns it back into life. That's what makes topsoil topsoil. There's always some high school kid that walks by my compost pile and goes, "Ew, grass smells bad. I'm too good for smells. Can we move this to where other people live?" And I actually know that, like, that's like the danky dank soil right there. Like, that's gonna make our dirt so much better. Because there's like this thriving community of decomposing. You know, if you turn my compost, steam comes out because they're releasing so much energy that water boils. Compost can start fires. If you take a good handful of good soil, like that much, I've got some numbers that you don't need to memorize, but just to put things in perspective. Famous study by Andrew Mondenki or something. One handful of good soil contains 1 trillion bacteria, trillion with a T. Imagine all that traffic. If there are 1 trillion organisms digesting and breaking stuff down and making little Legos, plus 10,000 protozoans, 10,000 nematodes, and as much as 25 kilometers of fungal mycorrhiza in that much space. You know, we call that the soil food web. And together with all the other stuff, that's a whole ecosystem. There's predators, there's producers, there's little stuff and big stuff. Centipedes eat the little stuff that eats the littler stuff. So there's a whole food web down there, relies on those decomposers to make all of this litter into the decomposing material that it actually has the parts for life. That's the secret to all Jaws creation, is this little part of breaking stuff apart and making it useful again. Like every time that I see a gardener like raking topsoil, I'm like, no, more, not less, more. Like we take that stuff and we bury it in the ground and then we cover it so it doesn't decompose anymore. Like landfilling mulch, like that is just so silly. And I need to skip number 7 and number 8. Because I got to talk about number 9 and 10 together before the bell rings. I have, what, 13 minutes? Is that right? Anybody know? 13. I'm going to skip around between those two study goals. And warning, as I often do, I'm going to speak metaphorically about the question, and then we're going to come back to the question, okay? So first the metaphor. This is not a rhetorical question. I really don't need to drag this out. Help me by thinking about it. What would go in the perfect human pill?
Carbs, proteins, and vitamins.
Carbs, proteins, vitamins. Is that it?
Water, fats.
Maybe some water, maybe some fats. Is that it? Equal volumes? I don't think so. I think you probably need more carbs and less fats, and you definitely need less vitamins.
Sugar.
Sugar would be good, yeah. Maybe the carbs, sugar is kind of a fuzzy line. Yeah. Anybody else? Something else we should put in there? You know that this was a dream, right? Like back in the days of like the World Expo and Fair, we dreamt that humans would live in bubble cities and have flying cars and not have to bother with cooking and cleaning in kitchens because they would just eat the morning pill and the lunch pill and the dinner pill. How would you figure out if you had the right recipe? Like, let's imagine that I had like a test subject, Adam Coffin, and I took your freshly formulated pill, and I start feeding it to him. How do I know if that's a perfect recipe?
If he doesn't die.
Yeah, if he doesn't die, right? And then maybe we'll get lucky. And before actually dying, what would we notice if the pills weren't good enough?
He gets sick.
he has some deficiency of some sort. Maybe he's just not gaining enough weight. Maybe he has illnesses, right? He'd have some symptoms that we don't like. Then we'd compare him to a perfect specimen, and we'd be like, oh, wait a minute, the perfect specimen has more boron or whatever. And we go, oh, gotta add some boron to that pill. So we start feeding him the 2.0 pills. And then what?
Good.
Same thing, but something else will be missing, right? And so we can start with the most important, like we know it's gonna need like protein, sugar, fat, carb, some vitamins, I don't know. That'll be the easy part. And then, you know, like as he starts to look kind of sallow or whatever, we're like, oh, gotta add some more whatever magic vitamin X. Here comes some vocab. There's this thing called Liebig's Law, which says at any time growth is limited by one thing. There is a single limiting factor. There is a single limiting factor that at any given time keeps you from growing more. And if you figure out what that was, you can add it in a bottle. And this is the whole fertilizer industry. I don't want to get too distracted, but for those of you who know the game, this is sort of the issue with indoor pot growers. They figure out like the basic bottles of nutrients to put in that fiberglass or rock wool or whatever the wheat is growing in, and they're like, well, now we got to add something else, and now we got to add something else, and like every year they're like, oh, let's try this thing, now let's try that thing, and you try to meet the demands of the crop with more and more fertilizers. You identify the limiting factor at any given time. That's called demand-based agriculture. There was a moment in time, like a historical snapshot, where the American chemical industry had a whole bunch of potential and not a lot of buyers. We weren't making chemicals for warfare anymore because we won that war. And our economy was growing, and we had all these boys back home, and they were all looking for jobs, and we're like, okay, what are we going to do? So we turned all of like the ammunition factories into like pencil factories, and we turned all the tank factories into car factories, and we turned all of the military chemistry factories into like consumer chemistry factories. So we made like a spray that you can put on clothes so that stuff won't stick to it, and we made like a spray that you can use to sterilize toilet seats, and we made like a spray that makes your car smell better, and 3M became like one of America's most profitable companies ever because they figured out like how many chemicals we could sell the public, and at the same time they figured out how many chemicals we could sell a farmer. And at the time, chemicals were so cheap. Like labor was cheap and resources were cheap and energy was cheap and the economy was growing. So you go like, hey farmer, we know you're gonna need phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. Check it out, bottle 1, bottle 2, bottle 3. And farmers are like, dang, that's a lot easier than like having to always put stuff in my dirt. So great, we'll just start mixing in chemicals. And then we started chasing this Liebig's Law, trying to find every limiting factor. And so it became 3 big bottles, plus 2 medium bottles, plus 500 small bottles, plus special testing to figure out, do you need bottle 730 or is it bottle 731? To keep adding those little tiny, like, little bit of this, little bit of that. Imagine that we managed to keep this ugly man alive long enough to refine that recipe, to know the perfect atom coffin pill. Would it work to feed the Adam Coffin recipe to some other ugly young person. Because they're a little different, right? There might be some nutritional differences between boys and girls, between tall and short, between athletic and not athletic, or whatever else. Who knows? Weird dietary things, other weird dietary things, situational or circumstantial things. Maybe sleeps less, sleeps more, who knows? Right? So even if you can refine one perfect recipe, that's not applicable everywhere, because, you know, every human is unique. You're all special little flowers, every one of you. You like my next metaphor? Here's where this gets us. Liebig's law says there's always one limiting factor. Demand-based agriculture tries to identify and provide those synthetically. But the challenge that you run into is corn over here is different from corn over there. Situational differences, just like people are different. So even if you could theoretically possibly figure out the demand-based agriculture recipe for one spot, that doesn't help you in every other spot. Different crops, different seasons, different years, different soils, different climate, different rainfall, different temperature. So there's also the hippie way to do this. Watch. Industrial agriculture is pretty much demand-based. It's trying to figure out what's in the factory you buy it in a bottle. But sustainable / hippie agriculture, we are what's called resource-based farmers. We don't focus on what's missing. We focus on making like the best possible mixture up front. Hippies like me, we put everything in the compost. At my house, there's like ham sandwiches and orange peels and everything. You can't fit eggshells in your, oh my God, you can put chicken in my compost. I literally have everything except plastic and metal in my glass in my compost. Like clamshells and like lobster guts and like fish bones and whatever. It all goes in there. Because my idea is if you just have a richer resource, there will be less deficiencies to discover. Think about the implications for the human diet, by the way. If we can do these parallel conversations, the food pill versus the fertilizer thing, imagine what this means for growing a human. Do you all know anybody who's obsessed with like food supplements and buys like stuff in pills all the time? That like takes a whole bunch of pills every day? How many of you know somebody like that? I know one person in particular that comes to mind, whose name I can't say because we're on YouTube, but I'll tell you later. And this person, you look in their pantry and like one whole double door, like 3-shelf thing is like all bottles and tubes and like packs. I think they probably take about 40, 45 pills a day. And every time I go over, they're like, oh my God, I just found out that you can take 2,000 milligrams of zinc or whatever, and it helps you with like your fingernail density or whatever. And I'm like, I've never had a problem with that because I just eat a lot. Which is another way to think about human nutrition. It's just like, what if I just eat a little of everything? Like, that's my whole nutritional plan for my children. Is like, if they're not eating it yet, I'd like them to try a little bit. That's like my whole strategy as a father. And they're beasts. Like, my kids can kick your ass, whoever you are, they will grind you into dust. They're like such unbelievable wild animals. They're amazing. They're like perfect specimens. And like my whole nutritional recipe to reach that perfection was like, oh, you haven't tried this yet? Eat that. And like I was like, oh, you don't like Brussels sprouts? Tough. Eat some Brussels sprouts. Yeah, I had Brussels sprouts last night. With venison burger and brioche. And homegrown tomatoes. And school-grown lettuce. And French fries. And fancy imported Japanese mayonnaise. And microbrewed beer. Because I'm rich.
Sounds good. Quick question. How is like food productivity in these countries that are
Aubrey, will you stop streaming, please? What?
like is food productivity at the max for these countries?